Bueno, tenemos 8:1. Si quieren, damos 4 minutitos y empezamos en lo que termina de conectar. Creo que con eso ya no, ¿verdad? Pues ahí nos escuchan sin eco. Buenos días, ¿nos escuchan? Si me pueden poner en el chat, si nos están... Sí, hay un poco de eco. Ahorita, según yo, lo eliminé, entonces quería ver si seguían escuchando el eco. Ah, ok, perfecto. Muchas gracias. Sí. Sí, ahora vamos a usar el micrófono, ya corregimos todos nuestros errores del lunes.
I will do a sound test. Can everybody hear me? Someone could write in a chat just to confirm.
Gracias, Mirna. Gracias, David. Así, ahora sí se va a escuchar fuerte. Estamos entusiasmados.
People think we're starting.
No, we haven't.
You know what I'm saying, right?
The other day we were telling Muriel that what we do in weddings in Mexico, that we invite people half an hour before it really starts in order to have people there. And she was telling me, do you think it is like a wedding invitation? I said, no, we already have 14 people connected and 3 people in the auditorium. So, so we can officially start right now.
Qué bueno. It is another day. We have a saying in French, les jours se passent, mais ne se ressemblent pas. That means days go by, but they don't necessarily look like one another. So today is a second day of our presentation, and all the technology is exactly as we were imagining it. So here we are. We have the second opportunity to get it right, all of it, and we have a wonderful opportunity to spend time together again and discuss the topic of our taller, Empathy Online, who cares? I think I know already, though, that you care. I can see it all over the comments and your response. So that part has been established. So today, my intention is to do a bit of a better job connecting with our participants online. So now I know where to look. This is where the camera is. That will be a first. I will make eye contact. And also I'll be more mindful of getting your comments and your participation to be real and alive. So that's one thing I want. I will do it slightly differently from Monday, in a sense that Monday for me, it was about staying structured and presenting the premise of Empathy Online. Today, we're talking about the concrete aspect of implementing it. So we'll have much more of a back and forth of an exchange between participants and the topics. So those are the two main difference. I want to talk a little bit more about the online portion. There is, you've been logged in. There is a lot of activity. There is a lot of personal reflection. There's a lot of feedback on the activities. And from what I read, I think we could do a whole workshop about just the first two activities of day one. I was telling Larissa in the car this morning that for me, it's as if I have organized a big meal. I have set up the table. I have planned the food. I have planned the decoration of the room. But until people sit, enjoy the food, discuss, enjoy each other's company, there is no meal. There is nothing except preparation. So for me to see you active online, this is the equivalent of watching you enjoying the meal and getting something, some nourishment out of it. So it's exactly how I was hoping and dreaming this could be. So thank you. Thank you, because if you didn't sit at the table, there would be no good stories. And today we're going to go into a little bit more of the good stories. This is another conversation that Larissa and I had, a small one, but storytelling is very universal. And even if sometimes as academics, we might feel that a story is more anecdotal and might not have as much weight in terms of guiding us, storytelling is also powerful, particularly when it comes to trying to create human connections. So with your permission, we'll go a little bit into the storytelling, which is our stories, but that will take us a little ways from the research findings that I presented on Monday. These, yeah.
Every time that someone is joining the Zoom meeting, you will hear that bell.
That's perfect. And what about when they leave?
No, it doesn't tell you.
Phew, okay. So
they can live in silence.
Good, because I might get a little stressed. Are they coming in or leaving?
No, coming in.
Good. If you miss any part, as you know, it's easy with our beautifully working technology. You can totally go back and listen to it again. Okay, so we're right into it now. I did see the comments of the two activities for day one. They were designed for a warm-up. They were designed to give us an opportunity to see how we already connect with one another. The survey, I had the vision of it, that it would be impactful when we see all of our fellow student teachers who share similar experience or their closed ones to us, and to see pages and pages of people who have experienced those moments connects us immediately. We don't even need to know more details. So that was a warm-up to that experience of connecting. The second one, the implicit, that was designed for, as I've said to you, to remove obstacles. So once we're aware of our implicit associations or belief system, we can work at them, but we can't until we're aware of them. So that was an attempt in our warm-up to remove the obstacles that we might not know, but that prevent us from connecting with others. So as I said, we could talk a lot about that, and I'm tempted because some of the comments were very interesting. So, but we will keep this for another workshop. Because today, as we know, we're moving into the practical of it. I don't think there is many doubts that all of us want more empathy in our work. Now, how do we do this? So that's, thank you, Marcos. That's where we are on a second day. It was Larissa's idea to split the workshop over 3 days like this and to give us a day in between. And I think it's extremely pertinent because it gives us enough time to think deeply about the topic and to be prepared and reflect for the next part. So as we move on to the next part, though, what I would like to do is just to put our brain back into that context. So I presented the workshop in the context of the integrated approach of lifelong learning. I presented it with the fourth pillar in mind, the learning to live together. I reminded you of all the tensions that we and our students experience, which are always present, even if we're not always identifying them in our day-to-day. The ones that were identified in 1996 and the emerging one. So that was the overall worldwide concept or context of online learning and teaching. We talked on Monday about the definition of empathy. We talked about the emotional dimension, which was the purpose for the warm-up online, which is not the focus of this workshop. We talked about the cognitive dimension, which is exactly what the focus is, where we're going to try to analyze and understand the experience of another. We talked about what empathy isn't, which is it isn't sympathy and compassion. And then we talked about the impacts, which, as you remember, it's a lot about creating clarity, enthusiasm, sense of belonging, motivating, engaging our students, promoting success, reducing the sense of isolation, and the neuropsychological reduction of stress. So those were the impacts that hopefully make it worthwhile to move ahead with this. And we talked about how can we tell we have an empathetic environment or culture is when we feel mental or experience mental clarity, when we have perspective and mental interpretation all in the cognitive, when we can remove bias and prejudice, and when we can have a response that is adapted to each situation. And the signs of negative stress, we talked about them. It's the tendency to generalize, distortion of thinking, that our point of view prevails, or that it's the same as others, or when we start thinking as us versus them. So that was really a summary of what we covered on Monday. And it's also the background or the backdrop of today. So the objective of today, the first objective is to introduce the strategies for designing an empathetic culture. I was having a conversation with my daughter. We have a 24 years old daughter who does take online classes. And this is her word of wisdom. She says, what is important is having a systems that support empathy. She said, you have to take deliberate action. This is 24, I was pretty proud. You have to take deliberate action not to override empathy when we design systems. So I would like us later on to discuss this a little bit further, but this is when we're talking about the strategy, I'm thinking about almost engineering it in every activity in how we present our courses so that we don't override the capacity for it. And I would suspect that what Chelsea Ann had in mind was the idea that, so if we think that empathy is about putting ourselves in the shoes of the other, anything that overrides it gives no voice to the other. So anything, anywhere that we haven't built in some sort of feedback, some sort of movement from the student's part overrides the possibility of empathy. I can't help, and we'll get in more into the details of this, but I can't help thinking about the quiz. I don't know if you use a lot of quiz, but quiz are a fantastic tool, and quiz can probably override empathy, possibly. But we'll talk some more about this. So basically, when we design an empathetic culture, the strategy is from the start, or as much as possible, and it's about keeping it aligned. So it's to keep it aligned with the approach, the empathetic approach. And then the objective, again, also is to discuss examples. So I call them the trigger points or the trigger events. So those are our opportunities. So when our students need something from us, or when something doesn't go quite right, those are the trigger events. We need, they need a response from us. So that's what we will cover today on day 2. So the plan specifically, so is a strategy, like I said, for designing the culture itself. What does it mean? The approach that I want to present is the reflexive approach, and the example of reflexive approaches, as well as resources and tools. So we're going to go into the very concrete aspect of it, and then tools, specific tools as well. So this is somewhat a way to sum it up. Empathy needs validation. It needs validation. If all we do when we design or operate from an empathetic perspective is validate, we've done great. So to validate, what it means is that when you say you're validating, you're saying to someone, your experience is valid. It's true. I'm not arguing against your experience. It exists. I acknowledge that it is true to you. I acknowledge that I can see your problem. So this is validation. Just to say what you're telling me is true is a very, very it's the cornerstone for connection. The first one, particularly when we are in a role of authority. So immediately, if we validate another person, our student, we have the cornerstone for building an empathetic culture. If we go further from the validation, so I can see your problem exists, your problem is true. Problem is a wide word. Whatever you're telling me is true. And then, have you faced this before? That's one way to take the cornerstone a little bit. How did you resolve this problem before? This could be us making one step further. I acknowledge it. Have you had it before? How did you overcome it? Could be other ways to process. The second big thing that empathy needs is a tolerance for failure. A tolerance for failure is extremely difficult. Larissa, you told me about Mary Baird, the doctor from Cambridge. I listened to her interview, and one of the things she said, everybody goes through a period of doubts about feeling anxious, about things. She said, it's human. And then she said something that I think I'll never forget. She said, everybody's path to success has been more difficult than it looks. And, oh, I'm sorry, I went. And even in Spanish, it says, porque el camino de cualquier persona hacia el éxito, en lo que sea, es más difícil de lo que parece. So as we're teaching, we have to realize we're walking beside our students going towards a success, but it's not easy. Once they get there, it looks like they've achieved success, but we're walking beside them as it's being difficult, often more than it looks. So a tolerance for failure is an important part of creating an empathetic culture, because if we don't accept failure, where's the learning? And this is one thing I noticed. Some of you, I've noticed just some of you who started to describe a student. And when you started to describe a student, when you described the fear, several of you wrote the fear of failure. And I was finding this fascinating. So the student that you're imagining is afraid to fail. Now, in reality, shouldn't he be afraid not to learn? Or she? Because what do we sign up for? To learn something. But what are we mostly afraid of? Is to fail at it. In reality, we should be much more worried about not learning, because that's what we're going for. So if we change slightly the perspective, and if we say the most important thing is to learn, then we should want some failure. It's part of learning. And I'm always amazed at that with my own children. My daughters, they don't want to fail at any cost, almost. Like they sign up for something, and even if they're terrible to live with for a few months, this is only one example. We talked about this morning. but the fear of failing is almost bigger than any others. So a tolerance for failure. And in fact, Brené Brown, she says, no tolerance for failure, no innovation. This is a tolerance for failure when we're teaching is probably going to be one of the hard discussions that we'll want to have, because our job is to teach for success. So in some ways, if our students fail, maybe we failed. Possibly. 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 I certainly feel like possibly I failed. So this is going to be possibly a discussion we'll want to have. Now, the other thing that empathy needs is boundaries. And again, this is a fantastic opportunity to discuss boundaries. So when we have boundary in empathy, it is when we are very clear about what is okay and what is not okay. So we need to have a boundary in place to stay in our integrity. So one of the opposition to empathy that I often get is I don't want to cave in to my students because I start being empathetic to their situation, and then suddenly everybody gets an extension and I end up with difficult things to manage. But empathy has to have boundaries. And if we have boundaries, clear boundaries, and we stay empathetic within those boundaries, and we'll talk about how to do this specifically, then we're also teaching our students this process of having boundaries. And Larissa, I'm going to take you as an example. You were a fantastic example on Monday, because Larissa was not impressed with the difficulty with technology. And you said, this is not okay. This is not okay. It doesn't mean that we're going to go around and accusing people of this and that, but for our integrity, some things are not okay. And that's why empathy doesn't mean no boundaries. On the contrary, it's about clear boundaries. And we'll talk some more about this too. The Brené Brown, I don't know if you knew of Brené Brown until I brought her to this. There is a reference to her in day 2. She's a researcher, yeah, out of the Houston University, and she's been very known to the great public. She has researched on things like shame, vulnerability. She's done years of interviewing people, and she's done very impactful TED Talks about those topics. I have some that I've put in a list of resources. But she says that the most important part of being empathetic is to set boundaries. And she says within the boundaries, you make the most generous assumption about the other one. So you make the assumption that the other one is doing their best. The most generous assumption. And she says, in fact, that it's almost a selfish act, because it makes our life better by making that assumption. But because I have boundaries, I also respect my own integrity within that generous assumption. To me, that's a very impactful approach to an empathetic culture. Is validation, tolerance for failure, and boundaries. Now, in the center of our teaching, connecting to what we discussed on Monday. So we're looking for stress reduction, a sense of belonging and engagement, increased academic results. What we want an empathetic culture to look like is something like this. I feel motivated. This is my community. I feel less stressed. I belong, that sense of belonging to this group. As a teacher, I feel less stressed. But this is the utopia. We don't really control how they're going to feel or how everybody is going to feel. But this is, or how they will, how everybody is going to interpret the empathetic culture. I said a bit earlier that sometimes it's about having difficult conversations. And I read not very long ago that, I don't know how it is in Mexico, but for sure in Canada, we're being taught to avoid talking about difficult topics. We're being taught to not talk about politics and religion. Same here? Mm-hmm. I would probably add sexuality to it too. And I read that this fact has led to a great deal of lack of understanding of politics and religion. What we should be taught is how to have a civil conversation about those topics. So maybe when we're creating an empathetic culture, and the center of it is how we're discussing topics, this is the thing to keep in mind. If we're creating an empathetic culture, sometimes we'll be talking about difficult topics, but it's about how to have a conversation. Now, the strategies. So this is where the business world meets the teaching world. In the business world lately, there is a lot of talk about empathy, because empathy is really good for business. Most of the most recent books have been printed by people who work in a business world, because the more a business understands what the customer needs, the better they are equipped to answer to their needs. So let's behave a little more like a business and talk about what is it that our students need. So we'll use the wide lens today. So we'll talk about the big question, the big answer to this. So what do your students need? If everybody was to and give an answer, it could be 60 different answers. But what if we try to generalize our big definition? So this is what I've started with. I've crafted a general definition, and we have a specific forum online. So if you could add, take away a word, but this is what I'm starting with. What do our students need? Our online university student consists of people who want to learn about a topic with ease and engagement. I don't know if you'll agree about ease, engagement. In order to perform and complete a course as part of a diploma that will allow them to enter a profession. The word that I think might be missing, did you want to say?
No, go ahead.
Was access.
To access a profession, to access professional life.
I was thinking more like how, like to learn about a topic with ease, and I was wondering if access shouldn't be there.
Maybe access at the end. I would say that maybe our students, they want to finish or to obtain a diploma, to access professional world, to access certain group of activities or certain kind of work.
Mm-hmm. In their profession.
In their profession. Mm-hmm.
What about everyone else? Anything to add, to take away about what do every one of our students want? Kind of the general want or need. I would see if someone can at some point put it in the forum, add access.
Does anybody that is at a distance want to write on the chat what if they agree with the general vision of our students, or do you find something missing in what Muriel just wrote down?
Do you think that your students always want to learn about the topic you teach? So this might not be exactly right.
That's what I said, to get a diploma. Maybe having a diploma means that you have to go through several courses. Some of them might be interesting, some of them might not.
So perhaps we would need another word with the topic. We would need about a required topic. So what do you think made your students sign up to the program then?
To become a professional.
Professional something.
Professional something, that's why. To become certain person.
So they didn't know what they were signing up to. So so let me understand this then. So any example? They sign up to be psychologists, they sign up to be...
Doctors, they sign up to become administrators.
Okay, and what course is it that they don't really want to be in or chose? Yes.
A lot of people doesn't want to study statistics or maths, but they need to study data assignment.
Yes.
No.
So there are things that our students, even our mature students, don't expect. They're learning about a topic, but there's a lot of surprises then.
Yes. One person, Guadalupe, on the chat mentioned that is people that just want to fill in the activities.
Fill in the activities.
Yes, let me see exactly what
Filling
she
the
said.
activities.
She said,
Our students want to obtain a diploma
yes.
first. First, they want to obtain a diploma that will allow them to enter a profession. And they want to do it how? I had ease and engagement. Do you think they want it easy? Yeah. Yeah. Do we want things easy too? Sometimes. So ease is not a bad thing, necessarily. I think that ease has something to do with that fear of failing as well. Because if I want something that is difficult, then if I want it difficult, I've increased my chance of failing. So when we're saying we want it with ease, it's perhaps our way of saying so that I succeed.
They say here, they want things easy, but it is not in real life.
Mm-hmm. So real life. So basically, do you think that when we teach, we're teaching about real life?
At certain point, we should. No, I mean, if you're trying to prepare the student to become a professionist and to deal with certain things that are common in that profession, yes, you're supposed to prepare them for real life.
Very good. Very good. Very good. So the student wants that too, because that's what he wants. He wants a diploma to work in real life.
Yes.
So we want, because this is good. We want the same thing.
Here's a question that Eric asks. Students should be mature about their knowledge?
Is that a question?
Oh, no, it's a statement. Yes, sorry. It's not a question, it's a statement.
What is maturity?
Eric, what is maturity?
Eric? How do we measure it?
I would say that maybe it's how responsible you are with your learning process and how committed you are with the knowledge you're about to achieve and to gather. Maybe, I don't know, Eric, if that is what you're saying, but I would try to think in that sense, no? Because mature knowledge evolves. And even if we're talking about in our professions, the professions evolve themselves. So when you're talking about mature knowledge, I would say how you face the challenge that your own profession brings you.
And if we say that maturity has to be about being responsible, then the process of maturity fits perfectly with online teaching. Because our online students are supposed to be mature, autonomous, or in a process of being. So that fits.
Yes, Eric says it is aware what is studying. The student is aware of what he's studying. No?
Yeah, but we're
this
saying
awareness.
the awareness. We're saying here that our students, this isn't the part of the definition of our students. They're not aware. I had this amazing conversation with a young Mexican yesterday who studied archaeology. He was not aware about the statistics part of archaeology. He did not sign up for that. And he could not believe that there was statistics 1, statistics 2, statistics 3.
Yeah.
Until he actually worked on archaeology sites and he realized there is no one can build or rebuild a site unless they are very comfortable with statistics, because everything is designed like from that perspective before any rock is touched or moved.
Right. Leticia says that what is real life though? Because sometimes we might be teaching from our personal point of view about life.
Good point. I have a feeling that our students, they're not taking a course necessarily to learn about real life. I have a feeling that they want to enter a real profession. Maybe the realness in that life. So if we were, I hope someone is taking notes because I want us to recraft this statement together so that we have a sense, because there is two things going on here. There is our perspective as a professor, what we're doing, bringing them into the real world and putting requirements they didn't expect. But then there's the perspective of our student. It's not to say that they're wrong. It's just to say that it is. It is what it is. And it's not too difficult to imagine, because we were young too. Like when we signed up for things, we often didn't know, even now. And age shouldn't even be a factor, because we can sign up for courses that bring very unexpected aspects to get to that final line. But I'm interested again about, from your students' perspective, so they want ease And what about the engagement? How important is it to be engaged from your students' perspective? I think so. Very, very. Do you sometimes feel, in fact, that it's almost as if they expect us to entertain them quite a lot? Engagement almost equals entertainment. There's a fine line. But they want to be engaged, don't they? That's for sure. We're keeping engaged. We're keeping ease. I'm coming back to the idea of access, particularly with online. But I don't want to put it unless you see its pertinence. Because we are in 2020, because knowledge is accessible, I have a feeling that our students online really expect access. If I need it, I should find it. And actually quick access, probably.
Right. But when you say access to what? Access to knowledge, access to answers, access to
resources, access to alternative ways to look at how to do this, access to one another, access to the teacher. I have a sense that access is perhaps part of what a student nowadays wants when they sign up for online. And I guess we can agree with this or not based on the lack of. What happens to our online students when they have a lack of access?
What happens to the student that has a lack of access?
Mm-hmm. They feel stressed? Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But still, I would say that there are certain points where if the engagement is really big and the intrinsic motivation is very high, you can overcome that lack of access.
Aha.
I think that it's not always a breaking point.
The lack of access.
The lack of access. Here someone says, se vuelven locos sin acceso.
Se vuelven locos. Okay, I think access will have to be part of our. If they go crazy, then there's got to be, because it's important. I would say, so if we rephrase it, and we will work at it, and some other ideas might come in the coming hours and days, but I would turn it around, is that when they sign up, it is to get a diploma, it is to enter a real profession, the real world idea, the realness of it, and it is to do this with ease, access, and engagement.
Yes. Yes, they mentioned in the online chat, they get discouraged if they do not have access, they get frustration, and it's not exactly clear when you mean access to what. If it's to resources, to knowledge, to internet service,
yes,
no, to information.
We will talk some more about access, because I know that I have highlighted it in a coming slide, so this will come up again. Let's not forget the perform part of it. Although our students need the stamp to move on, I would like to know what you think about performance. Do they care about performing? Our general student, we're talking about generalization.
I see a big problem, a cultural problem here in Mexico, because many people have an utilitarian view of school. When kids are small, families send them to school as a daycare matter. And when they grow up, they see education as the necessary step to get a better job.
Yes.
So there is a continuous line of lack of loving study, of loving knowledge. You see education just cram it,
A ticket.
a ticket to get a better life. So we have this problem here, and this problem explains many things, like we don't have many scientists, for instance, because people learns to be afraid of mathematics and science, and they see them as a very difficult subject because they don't feel that love for knowledge. It's just a ticket, and that's a big problem with students. Maybe not in all the cases, but well, I told my experience.
I agree.
Thank you. I think that once the student performs well, it is so rewarding that he becomes really engaged. So I think that our programs and our teachers are in charge of doing that, of fostering this path to good performance.
I agree. I see it the same way in my country as well. We want a ticket to good life. But that's the shell. That's the outside. Now inside, every day. If you think about your experience in teaching, have you ever met a student who didn't ever want to perform? Who would have bought his diploma if such thing was possible?
Many.
You do?
Many.
Yes? In a day-to-day?
About 3 years ago, when I found that one student was paying to other students to make the homework and everything, and he was paying for that. So he didn't want to learn. He just wanted the paper.
The paper.
No.
That's not new. You know, this has been going on forever, right?
Right.
You know,
Leticia on the chat also mentions that, yes, there's some students that see an utilitarian solution. Well, they see education as a utility, and it means in an equation for more money, not for learning and not for really learning something.
or contributing to community, society. So do you, like, I'm going to jump here a little bit on day 3, because we're going to talk about this a lot more on day 3, but do you think that we are actually teaching what we're teaching? Or maybe we're teaching people how to be citizens, people who haven't gained a maturity yet, some, not all. And actually our role is not to teach statistics or to teach language. It's actually to teach them education, because somehow they missed that lesson by the time they arrive at university. This is a very important and interesting and difficult topic, and it goes with the ease part. Mm-hmm. So now we all agree that the ease and engagement can take our students, not all of them, but down the dark side. Which is very important, because if it's the reality, this is the idea of understanding their context, their perspective. Their perspective is that what we offer has no value except for the seal. Once we understand that, we can operate with some tools. With some tools, we can operate within the parameter of it, but we need to know it's a real thing. I would argue that the performance is also a real thing. I would argue that there are many students who need further education to learn to perform. And as they perform, they build their confidence, and it makes them balanced citizen in our world. Each time they perform an assignment, a forum, they get feedback, validation. They become more and more confident. And that's what we want as a society. We want education to build people, all of us, to be more and more adapted to solve problems, really. So I would argue that we want to keep perform, even if it gets eliminated by too much ease, even if that's the dark side of it. So I think that we're getting an idea, and we will recraft it and have it between us, and we'll continue tweaking it until we agree that this is our overall definition of our students and their reality, whether we like it or not, and we wish it was different, but it is how we can craft their definition, knowing that each time we generalize, we are not in an empathetic, we're just missing a lot of people, but this is the exercise, first of all. There we go. Now, let's talk about more of the strategies. We're going into the deeper part of it from the utopia approach that people are in our online courses to learn. So this is one of the definitions that I found that resonates with me. My mature and engaged students, they're in my classes to learn about a topic. And because they signed up online, they have a significant amount of flexibility of their time and space. They can be studying from the cafe or anywhere, which is conducive to their autonomy and reflection. It gives up excellent opportunities for interaction, which is what we experience just with our little group, between learners and teachers, not just one-on-one way. All of it can be a source of motivation, mutual support, critical stance, arguing your position, and synthetic approach. This is the opportunity that we're giving our students, or that online teaching gives our student. To me, this is extremely hopeful. This is an opportunity that can support all of these about interaction, about motivation, mutual support. This is our chance. We won't succeed with everyone, but this is our opportunity. Let's see now how we will design it with strategies. So if we remember that an empathetic environment is a safety net, we need to design how we're going, the strategy, how we're going to insert it directly into our courses. So first is to state the purpose and intention for the course. So what is the reason that this course exists? What is your intention as a teacher? So if you have students that you know already did not expect statistic, maybe one of the first thing we want to do is to set the intention. This course, ladies and gentlemen, exists to support you in your career. You might not have expected it, but I am here to walk you through this part of your profession, which is going to be significant in achieving success. Sometimes I don't know if you've been involved with designing course curriculum, but there's a lot of thought that goes into that. And the course curriculum often the result of it is a very small paragraph that describes the objectives of the course and how they're going to be measured. But often what it doesn't do is it doesn't reflect the hours and hours of discussion behind it to justify why this particular course is important. And in my experience, the students don't always know. So perhaps the first step would be to accompany them through that disappointment, the first disappointment, by bringing it to a reality. Did you want to add something?
No, I agree with you. I think that it's one of the first things to do, and mainly when you have a course that as statistics, that it's kind of it's not very liked by all students, and you have a lot of abandonment, dropouts. So I think that the basis is to tell them, don't be afraid of mathematics, don't be afraid of statistics. It's going to be good for this and this. How is it going to help you in your professional life? Maybe bring examples of how it is being used on the specific area in which you are studying, in order to convince them first that it is not just to bother. There's a reason why that assignment is in the program, you know? And the things that you could be doing if you try to understand a little bit more of the subject, or the comprehension that you get if you understand, in this specific case, statistics and how to read them.
Wonderful, exactly. And often right from the start. Sometimes we have a tendency of presenting the theory, which is what I did, and move along with the more concrete examples. Perhaps if we're trying to establish the purpose and intention, maybe we want to explain it from the start. Because I've been involved with a lot of course design, we're talking about sometimes months to design a program and to decide which course of it. We're talking about meetings and meetings with people from the industry who will sit with us and tell us, yes, we need your graduate to know about this, this, and that. And then all the effort into making sure that what you teach in this course is not taught in that one, and all the decisions you make about your syllabus, your curriculum. And then we present it, and it's like, ta-da! You just gotta pass this. So perhaps it's a little bit us who could do better or more to engage our students by explaining the process, why this course is part of it and why it's important, and all the thinking that went behind it. If we want our students to be more mature, perhaps we want to approach them with that perspective.
Yes, Leticia says, maybe we could tell them, the students, it is okay to be afraid of a certain subject, but that they won't be alone, and that we are here to guide them in that path.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's not designed just to trip them. Right. Not just to make their life harder for that seal at the end. I also I also have, this is anecdotal again. We have to remember our role because we are a figure of authority. So what we say counts a lot. And this young man that I mentioned earlier who studied in architecture, he said his professor on the first course told the whole class, don't expect to make money in being archaeologist. You won't make money. Do you think that this young man works as an archaeologist? No, I think he believed him. So, this is too anecdotal to draw too much conclusion, other than everything we do say can have a lot of impacts, particularly if it's not supportive, because we do stand as an expert in our field. Another one, establish inclusion, another strategy. So create a learning atmosphere where teachers and learners feel respected and connected to one another. How do we establish inclusion in our learning process? Do we have anyone who want to volunteer? How do you make it so that everybody is included? Any strategies that work for you? A negative, yes, it's negative is good too.
It helps.
The thing is that I was working in this institution, I won't say names, and we were designing a course to teach students mathematics with tablets.
Yes.
So an institutional level required, because the budget and all these things, that we designed the course for iPads. And we designed the course for iPads, and it was a very pretty course.
Yeah, you designed it.
Yeah. But when we came to the classroom, all the students use Android. So you can feel the shock. They are not included. But that is a problem that came from the institution and institutional requirements. So sometimes it's very difficult for you as teacher to fill this gap between the institution and students.
Exactly. So how did you deal with it? How did you create an environment of inclusion, considering how it wasn't designed to help it from the start?
Well, I have to take my Android phone out and start using apps that fit with the experience of the student.
So would you say you experienced success?
In some way, yes. In some way, yes. Because we, in the meantime, we were making connections between the original design of the course and the apps that we use in this course, and some apps similar in Android, you know, and we could success with the course, but it was very difficult, and I think that it is an unnecessary difficulty, because you could have take into account the real situation from the beginning, but as you have these institutional requirements, you can't. So you have to improve.
How often do you think it's going to happen in your students' life?
Very often.
So you demonstrated how to be inclusive in a situation. So basically you used a failure to teach. So basically you weren't teaching how to use an app anymore. You were actually teaching how to resolve an incompatible problem. I don't think it's a negative example, actually.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. This is actually a perfect example of creating inclusion. It's a perfect example because you could have simply said, I'm here to teach with a Mac. If you don't have it, too bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's a wonderful example.
Thanks.
Anyone has other example? Even if and it's a tolerance for failure as well.
Let me see in the chat.
I have one of mine is not as good as yours, but for inclusion, I would simply have in a Visio conference, I would have a round table so that it's not just the people who are more at ease to contribute, but everybody has a turn. That's one. I would have a forum giving points for participating so that I'm sure that everybody participates because they want their point. They're going for the passing mark. Where it's more risky, a little bit more like your story, is when I organize activities where they depend on one another. When I create collaborative work, I'm pretty sure that I'll have failure there because there'll be people who won't collaborate as much. And that will create a situation where the people they're partnered with will be left without a collaborator. So I will choose some activities like that, even if they're more likely to fail.
Say that with one discapacity, there was one student that has problem. She had arthritic, and she was not able to type. So we with the teachers and all, we plan to accept the activities by audio instead of typing. So. And she finished the high school.
Wonderful.
There is
That's inclusion.
case.
I wanted to ask you, you say you provide points when people share something in the forum. In our experience in the virtual high school of this university, that conduces to very like artificial collaboration in the forums. And that's something we don't want to foster because it's like bribing the student in order for him to comply. At present, what we try to do is that sharing something or working in the forums provides something that is essential for continuing in the course.
Nice.
So it's self-rewarding as an experience.
Even better.
Thank you.
Nice. Nice. Even better. When I give points for the forum, I often feel like I'm, it's like playing Pac-Man. Remember the Pac-Man game? When you're going around and you eat a little dot and you keep going and you eat another dot. I agree. I agree. It's not the best. Sometimes I find that it creates the habit, and then once they've contributed, even if it's artificial, I consider it my job to challenge them. So the point is not as easy as it might look at first, because I get them to deepen. I take something they wrote and I ask them to give me more, explain this. Anything else?
No. Just in this moment, Violeta mentions, besides giving them a warm welcome at the beginning of the course, sending them personalized messages and asking them to introduce themselves on a forum, I cannot think of other ways to make them feel included.
Mhm. This we've all had some good example here. It's the establishing of the inclusion is one that is a little bit hard to in concrete ways other than those to it's more like how we're going to treat them afterwards when special requests come in. It's pretty much what we've discussed so far. The forum, ways to create it where it's, like you've said, where the forum is used to build the next activity. That's pretty much it. Those would be the strategies.
Yes, I would probably add things that at certain moments to push everyone to see what someone is doing, no? In order to make this community in which you're acknowledging the achievement that someone has made, and also to help other people to do an effort and to recognize that they could do certain things in that sense also.
I like to use curiosity whenever I can. That's often a human trait that drives us, motivates us. So sometimes curiosity is a good one. One of my trick is, I don't know if you feel that way about teaching online, but I feel often I am so privileged because I have students, serious students, who do such good work, and they give me the result of deep research or thought or creative process, and I'm the only one who gets to see it. I am the only one who will actually have the privilege of reading a good essay, like a very good essay. So sometimes I will tell my students, I've received such incredible work. If you are interested in reading what your peers have written, give me permission and I'll share what they wrote. So that curiosity is sometimes, so they want to know what did they write? Like, how is a really good essay? What does it look like? Because usually it's private, right? It's between a student and a professor. And so that's one way possibly to create inclusion.
Yes. For instance, we made that with the MOOC, you know? And we asked people to make a blog and to publish in their activities. And if they wanted to share them with the rest of the people, to publish the link in the forum.
Wonderful.
You know? So, and in that sense, they were looking at each other's and commenting among them, and that helped with that curiosity, but also that made a learning community.
This is wonderful because then the knowledge comes from all. So I can write a good essay, but not just me. Others can too. So suddenly, if they choose to share that, there's way more examples of what a good essay could look like. Nice, nice. The other one here is to develop a positive outlook, create favorable approach to new learning with inclusion of personal choice. I feel I have a little bit more to say about this one, and I'm curious to hear what you have to say. In online, I found it to work quite well when I give my students choices. And I'm sure you're using this too. So if they have a work to do, like an assignment of some sort, I will tell them you can choose this case study, this one or that one. It's your choice. You must use that too. Mm-hmm. And also, like even in exams. So that way there is something that allows a student to pick which one they're going to be evaluated on. So I'd like to hear back about how you use that, choices.
Okay.
You go.
No, there are different kind of courses that we, and at a certain point, different levels in which they can take choices. No, so for instance, I have had courses, just like you said, which you give them some study cases and they have to choose one of them. But for instance, again, in the MOOC, what we said is people was coming from so many countries with so much context, different contexts, that we said, you choose a problem that is in your school. Maybe there were people that they were not teachers. So we said at your work or at your children's school, no? So you choose something that is meaningful to you. And then from that, we will be doing the project. But it was something very close to everyone, and they could be working with elementary school, or they could be with high school students. There was people that were on training, no? So that way, it was what we found was a strategy to really make everyone feel comfortable with the project that they were working on.
And when you're saying everyone, we're talking about how many?
22,000 people.
22,000 people. So,
maybe not all of them made the project, but yeah.
but do you see?
Yes.
Do you see? So this is not new. You know this. You've known this for so long. However, this is the practical way to have student-centered education. So by creating your activity, designing them from an empathetic point of view, which is just what you did, what is the problem that you identified in your context? You're using the empathetic approach with 20-some thousand people. So this is the fantastic, and we know this is not new, but it's always so good to remember that it's impactful. We can do great things with that approach.
Yes, and I think that maybe the lesson here is that sometimes when you talk about student-centered strategies, maybe the resistance is I cannot handle. If I have 50 students, I cannot handle 50 different stories, you know? And at the end, yes, you can. You have to think again in different ways of assessment and different strategies for self-reflection and self-assessment. But I would say that that's a big lesson, that it is possible even in a 22,000 student group.
Voila. Voila. So this is one more strategy for designing an empathetic culture or for handling 22,000 students. Increase meaning. So we talked about it as the start of the purpose, but increase meaning to the topic by creating opportunities to include values and perspectives from the student in order to push their reflection further. How do we challenge our students to find meaning in their learning? I think that this is, when we say about increased meaning, this is perhaps the area where our expertise shines. Because I don't know if you've had this experience with students where they actually don't have a lot of ideas on their own yet. Like if I'm teaching them about, my expertise has been tourism. If I'm teaching them about tourism and they're studying about tourism, they might not have a whole lot of meaningful contribution yet to this. So it's a little bit my responsibility, because I know the industry so well, I'm an expert, to find the meaning. Sometimes we actually expect our students, this is not contrary to what we just said, but sometimes we expect them to bring all sorts of existing opinion, ideas, but they're starting in it. So I feel that some of my courses, it's helpful that I frame this. When I'm asking them to bring meaning, I frame it very closely. Because remember that the best learning is in between what we know and this insecurity of what is new. And I'll give you a very a specific example. The idea of the surveys is an interesting tool. I'm sure you're using it quite a lot. But I was teaching a class about hotel management. And I started the class with a survey, and I asked my students to just check mark which kind of hotels they've stayed in. And I had a choice of probably 40. Because we don't realize how many kind of accommodation exist. There is the hotel, the standard that we know, but there's so many more. We can stay, there's cruise, there is a destination resort, there is, we can stay in tents, we can stay in so many other kinds, motels, lodge, econo lodge. There is a long list. And I asked my students to mark how many hotels they've stayed in. They were young. They've only stayed in one kind. So that gave me a whole different starting point. For us, if I was asking them to give me ideas of how to manage a hotel, and if they only stayed in one, my approach was a little bit different. So when we want to increase meaning, our expertise is quite important in that point.
Yes, and I think that connects perfectly with what Magdalena mentions, that it's also to be aware of the context, the specific context that our student has. That, for instance, she works with people 40 years or over, and that she sometimes can find, can see the difficulties that they have in progressing because of the messages that she receives. So the feedback that she gives them, it has to take into account those kind of things in order to really help them and to feel that they are taken into account and feel comfortable with the course.
You know, when we say that our online identity is declarative, so if your student will only tell you what they want to tell you, if you're trying to assess where they're starting from, those surveys before teaching, before the rest, are quite useful. And they're an easy one. Sometimes they won't have a problem just check marking versus writing a whole sentence about where have they stayed before, you know, in that example. So when you're designing an empathetic culture and you want to know the reality of your students, those, I think they call them as well pre-learning survey, or the assessment of what do our students know before we start teaching them. So, and online is great for that because we can actually use that technology to just easily measure it. So increase meaning, validate. So we're back at this idea of validation, validating the individual contributions. Validation is another word for support, but it's, as I said earlier, validating means what you're saying is true. I see that it's true to you. And sometimes the cultural diversity, so if what is true for you is true for you, but is new to me, often it means we have a cultural shock. And often a cultural shock doesn't exist until it's in a situation of shock. And one simple example for that, for me, I am from Quebec. My generation, I come from a generation where we have abandoned the very traditional way of addressing people of authority. My generation, it just happened, we stopped using vous, the usted. we stopped using vous. Our teachers started to be called by their first name, and it was a way to eliminate that sort of authority hierarchy, if you wish, between people. But then other culture did not follow this, even if they speak French, and even the following generation. So right now, 2 generations ago, I guess, from when I was a young person, they insist that they use the vous. In fact, I was told that at a job interview, the person who interviews whoever, if they don't use the vous, the usted, during their interview, they're not even considered. So it's culturally, the vous is back. The vous is back. But how do you manage that? Because when I'm teaching online now, I say, call me Mireille, because that's my culture. Now I have students who are very uncomfortable with that. And it took me a little while. Sometimes I'm slow, but I realize they don't like it. They are not comfortable with calling me Mireille. So they will call me Madame Amel or Professeur Amel. And I'm not really comfortable with that. In my point of view, this doesn't, so usually my first introduction to my student is, you can call me this, this, or this. I give them a choice. So we've usually come to a compromise, and they're calling me Madame Mireille. So I'm good with that. But culture shock can come in a very small, unexpected ways. So I'd like to know if you've had culture shock in your online teaching.
Anyone that is online who want to share a cultural shock event that they had?
In Canada, I teach with a lot of people from different countries. So the cultural diversity is a big thing.
Guadalupe says maybe the use of emojis. No?
The use of emojis.
And I'm also thinking that I teach a course with people from Colombia. And on the first video conference that we had, I kept on using, I don't know which was right now the term, but for me it meant something, and for them it meant something else. So they were just wondering, what does she really want? And they were asking themselves, do you understand what is it that the teacher wants? Because I don't understand what is it that she's saying. No? And it's because even though we might be speaking Spanish, there are different terms and with different meanings. You know? And I wasn't aware of that until I had then another video conference with them, and they told me.
That is a very good point. And this would be a strategy for designing an empathetic culture, to, when you can anticipate it, to state it, to say if there is anything in the way I present it that is new to you. And in Canada, French can come either from Quebec or from France. And how we express ourselves can be very different. So the multiculturalism can be just in my own language, same French, but different French, or from different countries, from how they culturally relate to teachers, professors, or, you know, more familiar. So sometimes it's just to, again, be upfront and say, if any terms here is new to you, don't hesitate to ask. Because it's pretty good when you hear they're asking each other, you think, oh, this is good. They're building a culture, but it would be a little better if they ask me.
Yes, that is what they're saying. Violeta says abbreviations and misspellings is also kind of shock.
Oh, yes. Oh.
And Leticia says that same thing happened with Colombian colleague, that they said, you're very juiciosa. And for her, it sounded like you're full of prejudice. And it's the other way. It's that you're very committed.
Yes, yes. So we'll come to this because that's more into the tools. But sometimes the only way to avoid it, the only way, is to be intentional, is to be upfront, to announce it. My intention is not to offend anyone. If ever I use a term that you're not familiar with, please let me know and I'll explain myself. Or if I use an acronym or an emoji, my intention is to be sure we communicate easily and clearly. That's the only way I know. But we'll come to that when we come into more of a practical. I would like to know what time it is. Just
what I was.
yeah. Okay. Oh. So the reflexive approach is about slowing it down, but I have to go faster now. Let's see how I can do this. So the reflexive approach is something probably many of you have learned. It's very common in commerce, in administration classes. So it's about stepping back in the midst of multiple decisions. It's because it says that we have often developed reflexes that are not always the best answer to situations. So online teaching allows us that opportunity of stepping back in our contribution. I'm having trouble with it. There you go. So it's simply, first there's usually a trigger event. There's a moment that requests our attention and our response. Next is the investigation and the observation, the analysis of it. And then we adjust our perspective, or we reconceptualize the event, and then it's the response. So this, you'll see, I made a mistake. I just noticed it. It should be trigger, event, investigation, then the perspective, not the response. So the arrow is not quite correct. So as I said earlier, like having an empathetic response doesn't always mean caving in. It doesn't mean, I just want to get my, that's it. So having an empathetic response means having the response that's the most adapted to the situation. And I've experienced it that sometimes being very strict is the most adapted response to the situation. So being empathetic doesn't mean, as I said earlier, that we're just going to accept everything because we feel like we understand their situation and we want to be listening and putting ourselves in their shoes. Often, it just means that we understand what's going on clearly, which is what we talked about on Monday, the clarity of it. So when we're talking about a reflexive approach, I'm going to give you some example. So there is times there. I'll tell you a specific example. I had a student. He was a mature student from another country. He had disclosed enough for me to understand that he was a dad of 4, having a job that allowed him to take classes at night because he was the provider for the family for daytime. And he wanted a better life for himself. He signed up for that program. And I was very aware of his context. He came from another country. Sometimes language could be a challenge. And I started to notice things that resembled plagiarism. And I started to pay more attention to the work that he was giving me. And sure enough, he was cheating. He was copying. And he was even copying from other students. And I used all this analysis approach to be sure of what I was starting to notice. And the more I understood his context, the more I realized that he was trying to obtain the seal to get a better life for himself without doing the work. I think I identified a lack of confidence. I happened to be in his physical presence once, and I watched him looking at his contribution to a forum, which was exceptional because he copied it from someone else. But I watched him looking at it with admiration. This was exactly what he wanted to say, but he didn't have the skill to say it, to write it. But I watch him admiring it as if it was his own. My first thought, like, wow, he's proud of it. He should be. It's awesome. Until later on, I realized he was just copying it. But as he progressed through the course, he was getting better at copying. He was getting better. Instead of learning to get better at performing, he became better at copying. So from all of my assessment, all of my attempt for perspective, there was only one response for me, was to fail him bad. Because now it was the boundaries. It was my integrity, the integrity of the program, what he was teaching his own children, possibly, and all the repercussion of this. So I had to do the hardest thing. I'm sure many of you have had this experience. It's probably the hardest thing to fail students. And in this case, it was very empathetic. And I know it was empathetic because I did not get angry, because I was so clear about what I was doing and why, and I was collecting my evidence. I never felt I could shake his hand, meet him on a hallway, because I didn't let that event build up all that tension, that stress. And that is an example of a reflexive, empathetic approach. Anyone has something to say?
Anyone with another trigger event that puts you in a situation where you have to
We'll read them in the forum.
we have 2 comments online. It happened to me with no, that I already read. Por ejemplo, al querer abandonar sus estudios es muy frecuente en los alumnos de la edad que atiendo. No? That would be a trigger event, as Magdalena says, when someone wants to abandon the course, and the way you have to approach that student in order to help him to stay. And I don't know, Magdalena, if you want to tell us what is it that you do with those students?
While she's writing, I've also had some situation with the reflexive approach where I had overachievers. I don't know if you've had situations where your students were overachieving. You still have to understand the context and to respond in an adequate way.
Yeah, or sometimes you have the student that is challenging you constantly. No, that is also in a provocative way, questioning what your knowledge, your experience, your method. No, so that is another situation in which you have to reflect: how am I going to approach this person in order to tell him that it is okay to question, it is okay to ask, but it is not okay to be always trying to put you in a position, in a difficult position.
Nice,
no?
Nice. That's exactly setting boundaries. I'm going to move on. You can add a lot to to the forum. I'm just going to move on so that I have enough time to cover everything. Resources and tools. I just wanted to broach on that topic because this isn't the center of what we're trying to talk about. But resources and tools can be very helpful when we're trying to address trigger event. So what is in your department, your institution's guideline for plagiarism, for cheating? Do you have student guide, late penalty? All of these, when we're teaching, I find that I need to have the support of my institution for some of the trigger events, particularly lately with some sort of career distress. So if we put ourselves in the shoes of our students, we might find out that they need some counseling. Where is the counseling from our institution? Do we have easy knowledge about that? Even for mental health, I put online on day 2 in the resources and tools an example of a protocol. I have a colleague who said she came in a situation of a student who seemed to be in distress to the point of attempting suicide. So she needed the backup of her institution for a protocol. What do you do? That's beyond our capacity and role, but we have to acknowledge it and know what to do with that. So resources and tools is something, I don't know if it's something that you always make sure you have, but if you get more and more into the empathetic approach to teaching, you'll want to have that. They're part of your tools. Now, the actual tools, which is the next part, in these lists of tools, these are things you already know. I won't spend a lot of time on it, but you know about online. It's about frequent exchanges, creating a continuous style conversation, focusing on one topic at a time, not overloading our students with email, trying to create real communication. You know all about this. We're going to talk again the coming slides about about some tips to write emails, and that's really wonderful until my second daughter told me that she doesn't read emails. So we can craft the best email possible, but some of our students will just scan through the emails to see if they need to read it or not. Some others will read every word. Anything?
Yes, Magdalena was answering how she solves the situation with the students that want to abandon. And she says that because at the end, the objective is to keep the students with them. So they try to help them doing a personalized planning, understanding their special situation or their personal situation, and they build together this personal planning in order to help them stay in the program.
So strategic planning, really.
Violeta says, she laughs and she says, emails are for our generation, not the new ones.
Good point. Good point. Some teachers use text with their students. Do you use text or emails?
Emails, I do.
Yeah.
No, I use email.
We have, in my university where I teach, we have this thing about privacy, and giving our phone number for text is tricky. Getting our students' phone text is tricky. So I think emails sometimes feel safer. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that what I tell teachers that I teach, it's important also to recognize which media for what.
Yes, good
You know?
point.
So sometimes it is a very personal comment or feedback, and then you want to have a text, a very private text, you know? And sometimes it's something that will help in general, the whole group, so you make it in another channel. Hmm?
I don't know if it's your experience, but the access idea, I find that my students want my text for access, for quick access with me.
Talking about generations, Leticia says that her teacher uses voice notes in WhatsApp. They use Messenger on the platform. But yeah, more like short messages, either through WhatsApp or through the platform.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For choosing the right method for the right.
Yes, or personalized video conferences.
The other reason we use emails often is to keep a record, right? Anything that's a little bit more structural. Other tools that you know is to have clear and feedback and fast feedback, explaining students' mistake and at the same time motivating them to work harder. You know about those things, so the skills to develop, so the encouraging feedback. Answering every question. This is one of my friend who's taking an online course, and she told me, she says, here are the reasons why I no longer ask questions to my online teacher. Reason 1, because my online teacher sends me pre-formatted answers. Reason 2, she sends me 2 resources that I can easily find myself. Reason 3, she doesn't answer every question from my email. So this is a serious student, and these are the reasons why she stopped asking questions. So the way we answer is an important one. So, but sometimes our students, I don't know if you experience that, but their questions are so complex, it's hard to answer them clearly. So sometimes what we can do is to create a format and say, whenever you need clarity, tell me the name of the course, the section. Sometimes I don't even know what they're talking about. Use bullet points so that I know clearly which questions you're asking me, and tell me what you've done already so that I don't send you the same path or what you found. So sometimes this is designing our way to respond that is time saving. Some of the other tools is the difference between the closed questions or the open questions. The only thing here is perhaps to keep in mind about the why, using why carefully, because sometimes when we ask why, we are sending the message for the person to justify themselves. Why did you think that? Well, I thought it was a good idea. So a why can be an open question, but it could also, like an example for the yes/no question would be, do you agree that the course was very good? Yes, no, and be biased. So now this is an interesting thing. There is an online tool that's available. It's called Tone Analyzer. So IBM Watson, they've created this tool. You can look it up online, and there is a little demo. So basically, if you are not convinced that our message can have or no tone to it, you can actually enter a little message into the machine, and it will tell you the tone of your message. So the reason why IBM has created that is, imagine that you make running shoes. You're a big company, you're Nike, you make running shoes, and your customers all over the world put messages on all the platforms about Nike. You want to know if they're happy with the products these days, but there is millions of comments. How do you know what it is? So they've developed a tool where the algorithm analyzes people's message. And they can say, because of the words we choose, whether we're angry or satisfied or loyal, in quite a level of subtlety. So maybe in the years to come, if we're not sure about our messages, we can always put it through the, the analyzer, and it will come back and it will say, you could do better. But that's just an example of a tool. And these are just some, from all the correspondence I receive from every participant of this workshop, this is not an area you need to work on. Your messages are very, very kind and empathetic. But these would be some, in English, some example of, you must send it to me is you can send it to me at the latest or up until. So just small variation of how we write things can make a good difference. Yeah, for those who will read our email.
Not everyone will read it.
I like the third one. It is your responsibility to, is I count on you for this or that. So those are some of the practical tools. And in fact, if you receive correspondence and you like how someone wrote something to you, you can log it, keep notes of it, and reuse it. Reuse it. I have this cute little story. I'm naturally, I think, good at writing empathetic message, even when I was young. And I wrote a message to my aunt when my uncle passed away. And I don't remember it, but she said, it was so good. It was so well written. Each time anyone passes away, I copy your message. She told me that years after. I liked it so much.
Yes, it works.
It works. So when you find sentences that you like, make a list. That makes it easier for the next time you have to write. Did someone write something else? No?
They said, Alma says that for her it's difficult to write emails, maybe because she's a millennial, but that, yes. And Violeta, thank you for the tone analyzer tip.
Yeah, you might not find it, it's not ready for education yet, but we know how that works, eh? Okay, so just a review here, stating your intention so that even if you get it wrong, you have stated it. For example, you can say, we don't control how someone receives it, but you can say, my intention is for you to well, my intention is to support you through this. And this is how I'm going to do it. Whether or not the person understands it the way you intend it, at least you've stated your intention. The second one, adding context. So if someone tells you something happened in their situation, so if you repeat it, I understand that from your context. So repeating a little bit, so that shows that you were listening. Avoid making assumption. The acronyms. I feel always like I'm not very smart when I don't understand the acronym. I feel like I'm out on the outside when people put an acronym that I don't know. So being careful of that. And good writing is simple writing. And I'm back with the very start. How many minutes? Because I'm close to concluding.
It's 11.
Perfect.
Yes.
This is it. So I'm back with the first sentence that I wrote about, that I presented about empathy needs validation, a tolerance for failure, and boundaries. I would just add one thing so that we kind of leave with that thought. And that one is, often a response might not make things better. No matter how hard, how much energy, how much effort we put in a response, often it's not what's going to make things better. But something that makes it better is the connection. So whether or not we have solved a problem, whether or not we have contributed to improve a situation, that's not necessarily what our response will do. But if we've created a connection, now that's often more what a response is about. So that's what I would like to part with. So we have discussed all along, and we're at the end of the second day. So now you're welcome to join the online platform and continue with the project, which is to design your student profile, to contribute to a database of current trigger event, and to create a response. Different approaches to problem. So use this opportunity as an opportunity to practice, to see how other people do and exchange.
There's one question from Magdalena that she said. Mireille.
Madame Mireille?
Yes. And she says that sometimes written communication could be difficult because there are misunderstandings, or not always what you're thinking is what you're saying in your written communication. So she asks if there are strategies or suggestions about how to make it a better communication.
The thing about writing is different than in person, because we've known about the psychology. Is if we're listening intently to someone, we tell that person, can you tell me back what I said? So that's how we validate the understanding of what we said. But in writing, I would say the best way is to state your intention. My intention is for you to succeed through this period. My intention is to be present, or my intention is to make sure you do your own work, not your neighbor. So stating your intention is what I think is the best practice. You'll see on day 3, I have some examples that I've put in the resources, and you'll see some example about good and not so good practice.
Okay, great. Questions? No? Okay, questions on the other side, the people that is not here with us? Okay, they are. No questions. Okay, thank you, everyone. Gracias a todos. Muchas gracias. Y nos vemos el viernes.
And let's continue with our parallel world of exchanging online.
Okay. I just wanted to know if it's yeah. Okay, so I close it. Yep. Yeah. I was just waiting for me. It's cerrar sesión. Se desconecta de todos los aparatos que usted tiene conectados a esta máquina. What does it say? This is the tricky one. Ah.
Fernando.
Ah, yes. Yes, let's see. On page 13, users. Oops. Activity groups, I think.
So the next, the next higher.
You can do that, I think. No, I think that. You can come back. Yeah, it would be nice. I will say that I would like to see my computer because you have the other one. The other,